Has Andrew Tate ruined a generation of men, or is he the controversial figure some claim is saving masculinity? We're diving deep into the impact of his philosophy, uncovering the unsettling truths and surprising insights that have reshaped what it means to be a man in 2025. Andrew Tate didn't invent toxic masculinity, but he weaponized it. He packaged it. He sold it to millions of young men searching for answers, and in doing so, he became one of the most polarizing figures of our time. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly who Andrew Tate is and how he rose to prominence so rapidly. You'll deconstruct the philosophy behind his top G persona and the specific appeals that made millions of young men listen. You'll see the psychological vulnerabilities he exploited, the real-world consequences of his influence. To understand the phenomenon, we must first understand the man behind it. Andrew Tate was born in 1986 in Chicago and raised in Luton, England by his mother and his father, a chess master. His childhood was disciplined, competitive, and centered on intellectual and physical prowess. He pursued kickboxing professionally, winning championships in the sport. But kickboxing would never be his true arena. In the early 2000s, Tate appeared on the British reality television show Big Brother, where he was evicted following controversial comments about women. It was a moment that might have ended most careers. Instead, it became his launchpad. He retreated online, built a following on social media, and began packaging a philosophy, one that positioned him as the antithesis of what he called weak, modern masculinity. The top G persona was born. Top G meaning top gangster, a self-proclaimed alpha male, unafraid to speak controversial truths in a world he saw as emasculated and weak. He surrounded himself with luxury, women, fast cars, and an aesthetic of dominance. Every post, every video, every statement reinforced a singular message: strength, wealth, and power are the only things that matter. But the persona wasn't accidental. It was meticulously crafted. Tate understood social media algorithms, controversy, and the psychology of aspiration. He knew exactly what young men wanted to hear, and he delivered it with unwavering confidence. Weak apologies weren't part of his brand. This was his genius and his danger. By 2022, Andrew Tate had amassed a following in the millions. His content was inescapable on platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Clips of his voice became ubiquitous soundtracking videos about motivation, masculinity, and success. He had achieved something remarkable. He had become the voice of a generation of men. Then in August 2023, everything changed. Tate was arrested in Romania on charges of human trafficking and organized crime accusations that would shatter his invulnerable image. But by then, the damage or the benefit, depending on perspective, had already been done. Millions of young men had internalized his philosophy. His influence was already woven into the fabric of how an entire generation understood masculinity. Understanding Tate's influence requires understanding his core philosophy. It rests on three foundational pillars. First, wealth and power. Above all else, Tate's fundamental message was simple: money is freedom, and freedom is the only real currency in life. He preached relentless hustling, aggressive entrepreneurship, and the accumulation of wealth as the singular measure of a man's worth. In his framework, a poor man wasn't just financially struggling, he was spiritually deficient. Success wasn't just desirable, it was moral. This philosophy taps into something real: economic anxiety. Young men in the 2020s faced genuine challenges: rising costs of living, competitive job markets, delayed economic independence. Tate offered a simple answer: work harder, be more ruthless, reject empathy as weakness. Second, traditional gender dynamics and dominance. Tate's views on gender were unambiguous. Men are biologically superior at leadership and decision-making. Women are naturally suited to support roles. Romantic relationships are hierarchical power structures where the man must maintain dominance or risk losing control. He spoke openly about his views on women's roles, often in terms that many found deeply misogynistic. But here's the critical insight: millions of young men listened because they felt confused about their role in a changing world. Feminism, workplace equality, and evolving relationship dynamics had disrupted traditional masculine identity without offering a clear replacement. Tate offered replacement: a return to rigid hierarchy and clearly defined roles. It was appealingly simple. Third, emotional stoicism and the suppression of vulnerability. Perhaps most insidiously, Tate promoted the idea that vulnerability is weakness. Emotions, particularly sadness, fear, or doubt, were obstacles to overcome, not signals to heed. Real strength meant never admitting struggle, never seeking help, never showing the cracks beneath the surface. This philosophy directly contradicts everything modern psychology understands about mental health. It creates a framework where depression becomes a character flaw, anxiety becomes cowardice, and reaching out for help becomes an admission of failure. For vulnerable young men already struggling with mental health, this message was poisonous. These three pillars: wealth obsession, rigid gender hierarchy, and emotional stoicism, formed the foundation of Tate's appeal. They appeared to offer answers to confused young men navigating an uncertain world. The question that haunts this discussion is simple: why did millions of young men embrace Andrew Tate's philosophy? The answer is more complex than dismissing them as simply toxic or lost. Addressing real male anxieties, young men in the 20s face genuine crises. Studies show rising rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide among young males. Economic mobility has stalled for many. The job market is competitive and uncertain. Traditional pathways to adulthood homeownership, stable employment, marriage have become increasingly out of reach. Into this void stepped Andrew Tate, offering not just solutions but purpose. He said, "You're not failing because the world is rigged, you're failing because you're weak. But you can change that. You can become strong. You can become rich. You can become powerful." This was intoxicating. It converted despair into agency. Instead of systemic problems requiring systemic solutions, young men were offered personal solutions. Work harder, be tougher, embrace dominance, community, and belonging. Beyond the philosophy itself, Tate offered something equally powerful: community. He created an empire of followers who saw themselves as part of an exclusive club. The top Gs, the ones who understood the truth while the world remained asleep. This sense of belonging is fundamental to human psychology. Young men, often isolated and lonely, found connection through Tate's community. They shared his content, quoted his phrases, adopted his worldview. Simplicity in a complex world. Our world is complex. Relationship dynamics are negotiated rather than prescribed. Success has no clear definition. Purpose is something you must discover, not inherit. Tate offered the opposite: absolute simplicity. Become rich. Dominate others. Suppress weakness. These weren't complex philosophies requiring nuance, they were straightforward directives. For many young men, the appeal wasn't primarily about misogyny or toxicity, it was about answers in the absence of guidance. But if the appeal is understandable, the consequences are undeniable. Tate's rhetoric toward women was consistently dehumanizing. He spoke of women as possessions, as assets to be controlled, as inherently weaker and less valuable than men. These weren't off-the-cuff comments, they were central to his philosophy, repeated consistently across platforms and reinforced through his community. The consequences were observable. Young men who absorbed this philosophy demonstrated measurable shifts in their attitudes toward women. Relationships became transactional. Women's autonomy was viewed with suspicion. The framework promoted by Tate women as subordinate became normalized in the worldview of millions. Critically, this philosophy exists in a direct line from the charges Tate now faces: human trafficking and organized crime. Allegations suggest that women in his sphere were exploited, controlled, and abused. Whether or not these charges result in conviction, the pattern between his public philosophy and the accusations is unmistakable. A philosophy that positions women as controllable objects doesn't exist in isolation, it manifests in behavior. Perhaps equally damaging is the impact on the mental health of young men who internalize Tate's philosophy. By promoting emotional stoicism as strength, Tate created a framework where struggling young men couldn't seek help without admitting failure. For young men already struggling, this philosophy becomes a prison. Beyond individual psychology, researchers and educators have documented measurable shifts in attitudes and behaviors among young men exposed to Tate's content. Teachers report increased misogyny in classrooms. Mental health professionals report young men resistant to therapy because it conflicts with Tate's framework. Social workers observe increased aggression and entitlement in young male populations. This isn't speculation. This is documented behavioral change at scale. An entire generation is being shaped by this philosophy, and the consequences are already visible. So what now? Andrew Tate may be incarcerated, but his influence persists. The question becomes, what alternatives exist for young men seeking identity, purpose, and belonging? Alternative models of masculinity. Strength doesn't require the suppression of emotion. Power doesn't require the domination of others. Purpose doesn't require the rejection of vulnerability. These are the lessons that forward-thinking voices are beginning to offer. Real strength, research shows, includes the ability to regulate emotions, to maintain healthy relationships, to seek support when needed, and to contribute to community beyond personal gain. Young men who embrace this framework report higher life satisfaction, healthier relationships, and better mental health outcomes. Critical thinking and media literacy. The Tate phenomenon reveals a critical vulnerability. Young people's susceptibility to charismatic influencers who offer simple answers to complex questions. The antidote isn't censorship, it's education. Teaching media literacy, critical thinking, and psychological awareness about manipulation tactics is essential. Young men need to understand, why am I attracted to this message? What psychological needs is it fulfilling? What are the hidden costs? Who profits from my belief in this philosophy? This isn't about rejecting ambition or strength. It's about discernment. It's about understanding that the most compelling voices aren't always the wisest, and that simplicity often masks complexity. Ultimately, the question for every young man is this: who do I want to become? And critically, who am I choosing to become based on my own values, not someone else's? Andrew Tate offered a pre-packaged identity: the top G, the alpha, the dominant male. Millions adopted it because it was easier than the harder work of building an authentic self. Real identity formation is messy. It requires introspection, experimentation, failure, and course correction. It requires asking difficult questions. What do I actually value? What are my real strengths? What kind of relationships do I want to build? What impact do I want to have on the world? This work can't be outsourced to a charismatic influencer. It requires personal responsibility and courage, the real kind, not the performed kind. Andrew Tate didn't create the crisis in modern masculinity, but he exploited it masterfully. He offered answers to young men asking genuine questions about identity, purpose, and belonging. His genius was in understanding what young men wanted to hear, and his danger was in delivering a philosophy that harmed both women and the men who believed in it. The conversation we need to have isn't just about Andrew Tate. It's about what comes next. It's about building a vision of masculinity that doesn't require the diminishment of others. It's about helping young men understand that strength and vulnerability aren't opposites. It's about creating space for authentic identity formation rather than pre-packaged personas. The generation influenced by Andrew Tate isn't lost, but it faces a choice: continue down a path of rigid hierarchy and emotional suppression, or build something more nuanced, more authentic, and ultimately more fulfilling. That choice ultimately belongs to each individual man, not to an influencer, not to a persona, to himself.